The Giant Killers by Conway Fitzgerald. Chapter 12.
An army of the undead had been awakened. The spirit of Gal GLaDOS had also been reanimated into a burning fury, no longer constrained by a human conscience. Quell was in possession of the Scorn Scepter, and making his way towards Melandon, determined to use the scepter to finally snuff out Fergus and his rebellion. Meanwhile, Dan and Thon were on board a longboat in the violent, monster-filled Great North Sea. They sailed within a fleet of 55 ships, all commanded by King Ivan. They had completed their mission northward. They had learned much and grown in power greatly, having helped Ivan's men beat back the Frost Giant invasion. They had retaken Voss only to find it an empty, broken castle, stripped of its people and its power. Ivan had no choice but to retreat, and to relinquish its ruins back to the Horde, but only after burying Harmon and Seshona. Dan and Thon had learned much in the ways of giant killing by the greatest of experts in the craft. Ivan's rangers and berserkers enlightened them with swarming tactics, using hooks and ropes that made taking down powerful frost giants look like tipping sleeping cows. They were now headed south along the treacherous northern sea lanes, on their way to rejoin the White Flame and their allies in Torvana. They had sailed hundreds of miles south, passing the massive Jagged Cliffs that marked the way to the end of the known world. They had nearly reached the end of the cliffs and its passage to the Great Western Ocean. That is when the northern priest Bert pointed enthusiastically towards the shore.
There, my lord. That is the place.
Ivan's high priest called out. Legends, rumors, and some actionable intelligence came to Ivan's attention during the early spring, before they embarked. These stories told of an impregnable giant fortress called Zai Te Fetten, the Forge in the mountain, named by the dwarves who claimed to have built it at the sorry end of the giants' whips. It was the legendary Great Hall of the Fire Giants that Dan's religion foretold of. There was no doubt for him or Ivan that it existed, yet no man had seen it, so none was certain where it actually stood. Ivan's many rugged scouts had attempted to find the fortress, and they had all failed. Most of these scouts were lost, but some of these men that survived the entrance into the outer mountain range claimed to have encountered many powerful giants and beasts of all kinds, as if they were collected in the sanctuary of these high mountains. The scouts deduced the western mountains were certainly the giants' homeland. The northern dwarves of Mountain Glow agreed, and told them the fortress was constructed into a mountain on the southernmost jutland of the Great Jagged Cliffs. Dan's interest was piqued when he heard the scouts and escaped dwarves tell of these stories to Ivan and his men. He remembered his dream. It was of a thin dwarf with one eye that led him to the place that he was destined to go.
Let's go have a look-see, shall we?
Ivan grasped Dan's shoulder and smiled as they looked towards the impenetrable mountains that hovered majestically over the rocky shore. Ivan had taken a true fondness to Dan and hoped he would leave the White Flame and join him as one of his many lords. But he learned that Dan had a deeper dimension that could not be sated, despite all the wealth, glory, and pleasures his northern lands might offer. Dan needed to win at home and avenge his family's destruction. Ivan respected that.
Absolutely,
Dan replied. Thon looked surprised by his enthusiasm, but before he could advise caution, Ivan spoke.
What? Aren't you coming, Ranger?
Ivan asked with a laugh. He had several of the longboats make their way towards the extremely rocky and unwelcoming shore. The steep mountains rose high into the sky, lost in clouds that covered the area as they rowed closer to the coastline. Ivan signaled his ships, 3 to shore, the other 12 to keep their distance. They found a hole in the rocks that led to a pebble beach. Their vessels buckled as they finally made it through the gap and ran into the shoreline. With a strong swell after the undertow, one of the boats tipped over. Ivan laughed out loud. His men from the first boat rushed to turn the boat over before it sank. Ivan jumped off the craft and made his way up the rocky shoreline without fear. Dan and Thon looked at each other for acknowledgement. Then they attempted to follow closely behind Ivan. It was difficult, as the Tonder King moved swiftly with unusual purpose.
What do we do if we find it?
Thon asked.
Knock and see who's home.
Ivan laughed again. He marched without hesitation until Bert called out for him. His elder priest huffed for air as he made his way up from behind.
My liege, we must approach with caution. The gatekeepers.
The wiry priest waved his hands skywards as if to suggest the sky itself was watching them. Ivan looked down at his priest and decided to take his advice seriously. Ivan looked about him and then made his steps more slowly and with a keener sense of stealth. Soon, only he, Dan, Thon, and Bert were alone together, marching slowly uphill, destination unknown. The mountains were massive, the pass, if you could call it that, treacherous. Though they were all rugged and seasoned mountain climbers, it was unclear what Ivan expected to find. Without a pack and at least a week's worth of rations for this expedition, they had been hiking up the pass for about an hour when they stopped at a river fed by a high waterfall. The mist of the waterfall caused a great moist haze all about them. It held a foreboding beauty. Certainly, no man before them had dared witness this place. Thon looked about, as he always did, in all directions. It was upwards, high above them, that he noticed something moving through the mist. It was something very large. The ground shook unnaturally thereafter. He signaled the others to stop what they were doing. All speaking among the men stopped instantly. They all looked upwards. Thon then stepped back slowly from the mist to get a better view. Another shadowy image moved above him. He rolled back further to advance his vantage point. It was then he beheld the first mountain giant. This beast was an entire cliff face come to life. It straddled over them completely, with one leg on either side of the valley. The giant was well over 120 feet tall. It called out deeply, in a foreign tongue that shook the ground and caused rocks to fall from the cliffs.
Who dares enter these lands?
No one knew what words were said, but Ivan gave Dan a look and a telling nod of his head. He then ran as quickly as he could, back in the direction of the boats. Another enormous cliffside came up from the ground in the body of another mountain giant. This one was even larger than the last. The four ran as quickly as they could. Then Ivan's high priest Bert stopped and called out in his own tongue.
Stand back, foul creations. The All-Father has power over you.
Bert prayed. Thon paused and made a step or two back Bert's way to try to retrieve the priest. Ivan instructed otherwise.
Run! There is no fighting this, you fools!
Ivan sprinted back down the mountain ravine without hesitation and then skidded down the rocky path skillfully towards the beach. He moved exceptionally well for a big man. At first it seemed to Dan and Thon that he was fleeing in panic to save himself. But as he made his way deftly, reaching so far ahead of them, they saw how his principal intent was to warn his fleet and prepare the landed boats to embark immediately. Thon turned back towards Bert one last time, only to see him buried alive under a hail of rocks, mud, and trees. The mountain giants hurled enormous mud boulders at them, the force of which shuddered the ground. Thon's body was covered in soil dust, just by being within a few feet of an impact.
Come! Hurry!
Ivan yelled out with nervous laughter to Dan and Thon. He ran swiftly, and leapt aboard his longboat. As soon as he regained his footing on board, he signaled for the deeper water ships to fire arrows, yet they were confused as to the target. Dan and Thon followed behind, sprinting towards the shore. Each step taken by the monstrous mountain giants shook the ground as they reached the gravel beach. The force of one mountain giant step near the rocky beach caused one of the boats to capsize. Another slow step followed, crushing the wooden craft into the shoreline.
Go! Row, you fools!
Commanded Ivan. As the boats dragged and heaved, attempting to escape the shoreline, the mountain giants loomed overhead. They roared and spewed every subsonic curse they had in their dialect. They threw huge gobs of soil at the fleet, sinking one ship instantly when it was hit. The force and weight of the soil missile took the vessel down, silencing all the screaming men instantly as it struck. As his crew rowed desperately towards the open sea, Ivan prayed. The Tanda King prayed to his All-Father that the recently departed, including his High Priest, may act as human sacrifice enough to cast a wind and set his fleet free. As ever more enormous drops of ground fell from the sky, they caused violent waves which rocked the small boats. Faced with almost certain imminent capsizing, Dan and Thon rowed with all their might, pondering an untimely death at sea. Then the men completed putting out the sails. As the mountain giants dug into the ground for more organic ammunition, a calm wind grew in strength until its winds caused the screaming giants to become harder to hear. Soon they were sailing rapidly out to sea, as if blown by the lungs of the All-Father himself. As the boats headed southward with supernatural speed, the water sprayed above them as the bow thrashed into the oncoming waves. Ivan ended his prayer. He looked to Dan, his eyes wide open.
Aye, there be giants here.
He laughed aloud.
That much is confirmed. If ever a mountain giant did lay in wait, it was before the throne of the giant king. The Emperor, are we certain of this location?
He called out to his next in line following the death of his high priest. Dan and Thon were happy to be alive, but still days away from Turbana or Melandon. Ivan was now sure he had the greatest tale to tell when they reached there. Bert, he believed, was certainly drinking with the gods and heroes now in the afterlife, telling of his bravery as he stood before the greatest of all the giants, faithful and unafraid. Con and Theos pondered the mathematics. At this stage, on this day, with existing components, and depending upon the weight variables of those involved, they could perform 4 magic teleportation spells safely. If they were able to convince Fergus and his shieldmen to withdraw with them, they could appear instantaneously in Perriman Castle, in time for dinner with King Owen. If they were unable to persuade Fergus, they could possibly reach Ramthar's army in east of Rufus and appeal for his help directly, and port him and perhaps his best man to Melandon to face Quell and the fire spirit of Galglados. The two approached the Great Seer in tandem.
Fergus, we implore retreat here. Quell has many servants, killers, and demons, in addition to this scourge of undead that we will likely not be able to withstand.
Theos said, because of me. That was my input to the mages, ensuring they knew about the various kill teams Quell had already arranged. Khan appealed personally first.
The All-Father be praised. Great Seer, your eyes have given sight to this blind land. You have shown the power of faith and the grace the All-Father brings. Yours has no equal in commitment.
I can't leave them.
Fergus smiled at his clever mage, for he knew where he was going.
Fergus!
Exclaimed Theos. He paused.
High Priest.
He exhaled. He had known Fergus longer than any other.
If you will not retreat, I will be compelled to bring Ramthar here. Do you disagree?
Fergus was impressed that Theos would place such a large piece on the board for him to sacrifice. If that was his intention, Fergus believed in this fight, and he was confident he would win. He had conquered his fear, that vision of swirling darkness which first came to him at Castle Voss. He could not succumb to that fear now. He would face Quell. The All-Father made it so.
Of course. Proceed. If Ramthar feels compelled to join us in this battle,
He smiled.
then of course he may.
Fergus said quite benevolently, though he did not offer any divine insights as to Ramthar's precise location. For that would certainly lead Ramthar to presume Fergus expected him to come. But with that much of an understanding, Khan and Theos wasted no time. Without a bit of farewell, they teleported themselves to the central kingdom of Rufus, roughly 500 miles due east. They had both been to that castle once, and had vague memories of its architectural layout. They prayed those memories were vivid enough. In a flash, they were gone from Melandon. Teleportation is a powerful, yet very tricky business. By opening an interdimensional hole, the Magi can insert themselves through a window in space. Through this magic portal, they can deposit themselves, and perhaps another, instantaneously, anywhere within this world or any other world. Theb was experienced with that magic. I had yet to learn it well enough by that point to try it on my own. It scared me. Many a young study of the arts have perished or lost themselves forever by performing the spell incorrectly. Even slight miscalculations could send you into the middle of a tree or encased into a stone wall. Khan and Theos had studied these incantations at great length with the Archmage Ming, so they were much more confident than I. However, even if they could locate him in time to make an impact on the battle, it was unclear if Ramthar would trust his life to their sophomoric teleportation skills. They both completed the first leg of this journey successfully, though the two ended up on opposite sides of the castle. The two mages had agreed to meet up at the city square, outside the gates to the main hall. They would then persuade the regent of their good intentions, and prayed he would provide the correct information which would lead them to Ramthar in under a day's time. If it took any longer, they would likely be too late to save Fergus and his followers. Khan focused hard on his memory of the market square. It was a wide berth of space meant for mule-driven carts heading in either direction. It was that destination he made his focus. He arrived early in the morning before sunrise. There were no carts there at that hour, but plenty of droppings. He was suspended in the air briefly before finding himself landed in a bed of dung.
Oh, of all the places, Great Silas. I hope this brings us luck.
Khan cursed as he gathered himself and attempted to remove what poop he could from his garb.
You there!
Called out a guard. Another followed behind him.
You aren't allowed to be on the streets before dawn.
Oh, I know. It just couldn't be helped.
Khan began his charm incantation.
But perhaps you can help me. I need to reach the regent immediately. I have urgent news.
These simpletons were no match for the kind of mind control mastery that Khan had achieved. They led him graciously to the main gate, where other guardsmen were likewise charmed into opening the gates and leading him towards the main hall. There he noticed Theos was already waiting for them.
Hello, old friend.
Khan smiled. Theos looked him over, leaned in towards him, and sniffed twice.
Did you port into a barn?
Theos asked.
No, just a pile of shit. Is it bad?
Quite. Let me do the talking.
Just then, the angry regent, Alton, made his way through the doorway in his hastily drawn robes. He had been startled awake, usually never arising before dawn. He saw the two mages and gasped in disbelief.
Whatever in this world could you want of me at this hour?
He cried out.
Just a word, Regent. We are from...
Who let these men in here? I'll have your heads.
The regent looked to his guards in disbelief. The dozen or so guards all seemed to be nearly unvexed by the regent's show of anger. They were soon out of their charmed state and realized they had all been duped. The regent approached and yelled again.
Now who are you, and what do you want?
His insolence caused Theos's patience to wear out. Theos grasped his quarterstaff, lifted it up a few feet, and then struck it forcefully upon the ground. A bolt of lightning flashed in the sky above, followed by a massive thunderclap that shook the whole building. The regent fell to the ground, his hands attempting to guard his face. His guards retreated, grasping their weapons tightly in terror.
We are mages of the sacred fire. We are the men who defended Tor Bana and rescued your fellow regent and cousin Eric from the clutches of the demon prince's agents. We were the men who rescued his body and gave him a proper burial instead of an infinity of purgatory. We
He paused again for effect.
are here on a critical mission at the behest of the king himself. We need answers, not insolence.
Theos could speak with great authority when he needed to. After that show of force, the regent was putty in his hands. Not only did he confirm that Ramthar was seen leading the siege at the keep 80 miles to the northeast, he offered 2 of his best horses for them to use, and a small detachment of riders to help them get there. Khan and Theos were grateful, and with enough awareness of the maps they had obtained, they did not plan on spending the whole day to get there. Instead, they cast a speed spell on each of the horses, which nearly killed the steeds, but allowed them to reach the keep in just over 2 hours of riding. During that time, the undead army completed its encirclement of Melandon, and had begun climbing atop one another to breach the outer walls. Fergus and his armed rebellion were outnumbered 10 to 1. It would have been far worse had not so many of Quell's men fled in terror when seeing the undead legions Moscow had created. But now the undead legions had begun a full press on each corner of the walls of Melandon. These creatures had no fear, only an unquenchable thirst for human blood. Arrows, even when lit with fire, did little to slow the undead advance. Those less decomposed than others might be slowed briefly, but those skeleton warriors who climbed over the walls on ladders could only be smashed with solid weapons. The men manning the northern gatehouse were overrun by undead warriors. They hissed when struck. If one arm was hacked off, they would simply grab at them with the other. They forced their way into the gatehouse, and with despicable cleverness, opened the gate and allowed the rest to pour in. The shieldmen did their best to create a wall to hold back the onslaught, as the undead clawed, bit, and hissed at them. Among the shield wall was mighty Kierantan, who commanded his men to hold on.
Strike at their heads. Remember, these beasts have no hearts to kill.
He called out. Suddenly, above the wall of carnage, a large light came to life above them. It was a holy symbol of the All-Father. Its light shined down like the noonday sun. All of the undead in range of its ivory rays melted into a permanent state of death. The shieldmen cheered as the northern gate was reclosed. But as the sky place symbol faded again from sight, the next wave of wanton undead marched forward undeterred. The eastern side of the village was mostly left unguarded. The undead warriors scaled those walls and began their attack into the heart of the village. The people screamed as they thrashed their way through the streets. Reg swatted at them with a mace. One by one, he smashed the undead in the head. Had he used his sword, he might decapitate one, only to find the rest of its body and severed head coming after him for more. These undead were as vicious as they were fearless, though not terribly difficult to kill, but there were just too many. The mages' horses were stopped when they reached the line of Ramthar's army. Khan and Theos were exhausted by the ride. Their groins were sore from the rapid galloping of the magically sped horses. Ramthar's men were sturdy, experienced warriors, and much more guarded than the garrison at Rufus. Yet the mages were still able to convince them for passage and an audience with the great general just the same.
Great Lord of the Green Flame, we meet again.
Not one for pleasantries, and with most of his attention on the last-minute details of his siege, Ramthar looked upon the ragged, limping wizards with little to no interest.
You are Silas's students.
He showed some acknowledgement of seeing them before.
No longer students, Great Lord. And Master Silas, as you likely know, is no longer living.
Theos offered.
Yes, murdered in his study. I heard. That is a shame.
Ramthar said as he pointed to one of the ramparts his men were shelling with catapults.
Close them in, reduce archer range, and ready the fire arrows. When that wall goes, I want you to rain hell down upon them.
He gave commands and started walking closer to the battle, as the two mages followed.
So why are you here? Owen prepares his men in Perryman to sail west. I should finish this march and be in Torbana by early next month, as we all agreed.
We understand that, Lord. However, there is a crisis that has befallen the Great Seer.
Ramthar stopped and looked at them both skeptically.
Why then did he not contact me? Or my high priest?
Ramthar paused his approach to the battle and looked back for his sage.
Dig! Have you been messaged by your gods about Fergus of Ebok?
Ramthar asked his priest, whose curiosity over the strangers had brought him into the conversation. He followed more closely behind.
No, my lord. He did not commune with me.
The sage looked at Khan and Theos with eyes meant for strangers.
These are men of magic that you know? They are from Voss?
Asked Degowin, Ramthar's most trusted elder wise man. He was a high priest of the Promethean gods, only recently reunited with the great fighter Ramthar. He was the consul to Partham, father of Ramthar, and had watched him grow since childhood. Degowin had never been deeply involved in the politics of the Order or the West, and often advised Ramthar to leave it all behind.
Is not Fergus the new high priest of the Order? The one they call the Great Seer?
Just then a large catapult missile struck an arrow tower, felling it. Ramthar's men cheered.
Press the attack,
He commanded. His body motioned closer to the battle at hand. Khan became impatient. He spoke in a tongue closer to the true Promethean common. He called out to him.
Ramthar of Promethea, you are our only hope to save Fergus from the attack of a vast army of undead, brought forth by the Demogorgon Moscal. Fergus did not ask for you, but he needs you. That is why we are here.
Khan could see he now had his ear, so he embellished the story the best way he knew how.
We require the world's greatest warrior now. That is why we have come to you.
Where is Galglados?
Asked Ramthar with some hint of sarcasm. He was genuinely curious to know the status of the man who had overstepped him for advancement as High Lord within the Order, only to turn to an upstart cleric of a minor death cult.
He took his own life in shame after Quell trapped his soul by way of Moscal. He has been transformed into a freakish undead form. He exists of flame and conscious anger only. He comes to bring retribution.
Ramthar did not look at Khan when he spoke. His eyes were fixed on the battlefield. But Khan continued ever more passionately.
Fergus and his shieldmen are no match for this evil. The High Priest of Moscal has been empowered with a weapon from the underworld. Only a warrior with the skill of your level.
Ramthar looked back, but only momentarily, as he raised his right hand, motioning for Khan to stop talking. He then looked back towards the battlefield, focused on the point of attack. An echo of cheer was audible in the front ahead.
You!
Ramthar grunted as he often had. His men had broken through the breach. The keep would soon be taken. He was victorious again. Ramthar then turned away from the burning keep behind them and made slow steps towards the two mages. He leaned into Khan deliberately and then sniffed at him twice.
Did you soil yourself?
Fergus emerged from his quarters in full battle armor. Ever the gentle soul, he was also an impressive fighting man with great size and strength. In full armor, he looked quite imposing to any fighting man he would ever encounter. Fergus wielded his dwarven forged steel hammer that was blessed upon him by Quell and Theo for just such an occasion. He marched boldly through the streets, inspiring his people to fight on. As each stray undead warrior hissed its way towards him, he raised his hand and disanimated it. This required little effort, only softly spoken words of prayer. The northern gate was covered once again with slithering undead. They swarmed like hungry ants upon a wicker picnic basket. Fergus raised his hammer high and brought about another bright sky symbol to silence the undead within its range. This time, Kiontan and the others were too exhausted to cheer about it, but they took that moment to catch their breath. Fergus then turned eastward towards a swarm of undead that approached him. Before the first wave of the zombies reached the Great Seer, he called out fire from heaven, a blaze of supernatural fire unlike any of his men had ever seen. The eastern edge of the village was completely ablaze, and at least 100 undead were consumed in the flames. Then Reg called out. At the western gate, Quell made his approach. Gal GLaDOS, or the Fury that he now was beside him once again. They recognized his armor, but could only see what appeared to be a man consumed in flames. Quell was atop a powerful black mare. His dark armor and horned helmet resembled the Demogorgon himself. In his remaining left hand was Scorn's scepter. He raised it aloft, and the undead halted their march. Fergus then approached. Reg and Kiontan took positions on either side of him.
So here shall lie the Great Seer,
Sneered Quell.
in this miserable village of Melandon, forgotten, never to be spoken of again.
His horse and the Fury that was Gal GLaDOS took slow, ominous steps closer.
I know who you are, Abbot of Ebok. You are unwise to remain here. Here, tonight, dies your sacred fire, and you along with it.
It is your foolishness that brings you here.
Fergus retorted.
You have no concept of the power that descends upon you.
Descent.
Ha!
Laughed Quell.
That is a word you shall truly know this day, as you descend to hell.
As Quell enunciated that last word, the armored spirit of Gal GLaDOS charged briskly towards him. Fergus's shieldmen collapsed onto him like a wall of steel. The Fury, the pure essence of Gal GLaDOS, was ever remarkably quick, and within moments had parried and forced back, and then slashed both paladins in several places. Kiontan gathered his strength, and seeing an opening, swung his long sword with all his might, only to have it pass through the neck of the flaming Fury with no effect. The Fury swung multiple attacks tirelessly for both paladins to parry. Both paladins were already quite tired, each having hacked down dozens of undead warriors. At the end of the next melee, Reggie managed to strike at what was the ankle of the Fury, knocking loose a piece of his assembled armor. The armor piece sizzled as it fell from the Fury, and then lost its glow. Reg witnessed the first glimpse of how this evil spirit could possibly die.
We must strike at the armor, brother. That is the only way,
warned Reg, as the Fury turned to him and struck him at the knees. As Reg fell onto his back, the Fury hovered over him, swatting aside his sword that he raised in defense. Keontan charged at the Fury with his shield. His great might came to bear on the Fury, knocking it back and causing its pauldron, the great left shoulder plate, to be dislodged from its body. With its shield arm down, it swung its sword arm quickly and slashed Keontan at the chest. He fell in agony.
Forward!
Called out Quell. The Scorn Scepter glowed its putrid green, its morbid powers drawing the undead army in for the kill. Fergo struck mightily with his hammer, smashing several of the undead with successive blows. He then swung at the Fury, the force of his hammer striking the sword, nearly missing, removing its one arm. Quell then approached Fergus on horse. He held aloft the Scorn Scepter and displayed its power. Its pale green glow was directed at Fergus and caused him intense pain, and then severe injury. It struck him without actually striking. Fergus fell to one knee.
Here, among the living dead, will the parasites feed on your flesh, Great Seer,
Quell said sarcastically. Once again, Quell donned the dark power of the Scorn Scepter to draw the very essence of life from Fergus's body. His veins popped and then ripped inside his body until the skin broke, spewing his blood. He fell to the ground in agony as Quell laughed out loud.
Yes.
Quell then struck down upon Fergus with the evil rod. Fergus brought his hammer to his defense with great strength, but the supernatural power of the scepter smote away the hammer from his grasp. Off balance, Fergus fell again. Then Quell swung low to his abdomen and dug the spiked rod of evil deep into him. Its withering powers began their work immediately, eating away at Fergus's insides as he fell to the muddy ground in unimaginable pain.
High Priest!
Called out Reg as he came to his feet. Another swarm of undead approached as Reg attempted to heal his fallen leader. Quell motioned for the Fury of Galglados to return so that he may heal him and his dark forces and restore his broken plate pieces to full strength. It was then the first flash of teleportation brought Ramthar and Theos into the fight. Soon after, Khan and several other mages and clerics that were embedded within Ramthar's army brought even more fighters and clerics to even the odds on the field. Their clerics turned away many of the undead, and the mages used magic fires to burn them. And the many great fighters they brought began slashing down Quell's advance with great effect. Ramthar did not hesitate. He approached Quell and the Fury stood in his way. Ramthar called out to his lost comrade.
Galglados, it is I, old friend, Ramthar. Come, let us join in battle at last.
Quell shuddered in fear at the hearing of Ramthar's name. His scouts and informants had given him at least a month before his army would reach the Western Kingdom. Quell was keenly aware of how much power followed Ramthar in his wake. With his mission accomplished, now that Fergus's painful death had been achieved, Quell communed with his wizards and assassins to aid him immediately into a speedy withdrawal. Ozymandias and the rest of their motley human remainder of fighters, thieves, and assassins had decided to lay in wait during this battle. They planned to watch and see what Quell's hideous undead army could accomplish first, before revealing themselves. They had expected those nasty elves to arrive at any moment, and hoped to be on the proper end of the surprise this time. But now that Ramthar and his bastion of over 30 fighters, clerics, and wizards had ported suddenly into this battle, the tide of battle had definitely turned. Quell's mages did not require much convincing that they were once again totally outmatched. As the fury that was Galglados engaged Ramthar, Quell took stock of his victory, relishing the slaying of the Great Seer, and so fled the field, abandoning his lost knight. Within a minute, Quell and his dark horse were lost within the oncoming rush of hungry corpses. Yet with Quell's retreat, his range of command for the undead was lessened, and their concentrated effort of attack on Melandon was abated. Ramthar took several shots that he would otherwise not have sustained by attempting to slash at the fury in the usual places. The Fury was representative, but not nearly as deadly as Galglados in the flesh. As soon as he discovered the key was to destroy the Fury's armor exoskeleton, it did not take long for Ramthar to demonstrate his breathtaking swordsmanship. He dismantled the Fury, piece by piece, until all that was left was the red circle of fire that grew smaller and smaller, until it faded forever from existence. Reg and Keontan used the last of their strength to ward off the undead that slipped through the perimeter, to keep them from gnawing at their high priest. They called out for help from Khan and Theos, but both were quite busy using magic fire to cut through the numbers of undead. Fergos's shield men fought with every last bit of their strength. Somehow they managed to keep the undead from his body, but his life was slipping away.